The year of 1968 witnessed the rise of what could be considered the most powerful display of unity the Mexican-American group had ever shown in history. In March of that year were the blowouts, when thousands of students from the Los Angeles Unified School District came together and walked out of their classrooms and onto the streets, protesting their current school conditions. In the 1960s, Mexican Americans found themselves rejected from Anglo-American society. They had no political rights, influences, were culturally shunned, were socially excluded, and racially discriminated against. Mexican Americans were in need of strong, organized, and disciplined leadership to guide them on the way to reaching social and political rights reform in the U.S. This leadership was found in the militant group, the Brown Berets. The Brown Berets were not always a militant group. In fact, they were originally known as the Youth Citizens for Community Action, YCCA, a high school-level student-run organization founded in 1966 in East LA, focused on improving the conditions of the educational system. Among the founding members of the Brown Berets were David Sanchez, Carlos Montes, and Ralph Ramirez, who, after working in Mayor Sam Yorty's Youth Advisory Council, a council dedicated to bringing awareness to the needs of the communities, they decided the youth of their generation needed better guidance and influences. The Chicano Movement was primarily focused on improving conditions for Mexican Americans in the educational school system. The system in place at the time did not acknowledge how the Mexican American community came with specific problems or issues that pertain to their ethnic and racial backgrounds, such as the predominant use of the Spanish language or the demographics of their barrios, neighborhood. The educational system in this area needed a reform due to the constant differences between what the students felt they needed in order to be academically successful and what the school districts actually provided. For example, in a document listing the demands presented to the LA Board of Education in 1968 provided by the thousands of Chicano students who walked out of their schools in order to protest, much can be inferred by both the walkouts themselves and the demands presented. Of the 38 demands listed, a substantial portion of them reflected the segregation between races and the discrimination prevalent in the school system at the time. The underlying problem was not racism, but rather how discrimination against Mexican Americans was based off of the inherent negative view of the Mexican race as a whole, which accounted for the lack of acceptance of this group into American society. This translated into the stigmatization of this group as dirty, criminal, and especially an overall threat to society. It was not just the apathy towards Mexican Americans that called for the rise of the Brown Berets, however. It was, specifically, the violence from police officials towards the youth in the communities. Youth Citizens for Community Action changed citizens to Chicanos, but because the members involved began to wear brown berets and took on a militaristic stance, the name Brown Berets stuck. The Brown Berets were recognized amongst the crowd by their attire. They wore militant suits, brown berets, black boots, carried rifles, and took on a militaristic stance. There was a fear, however, that the Brown Berets were capable of inspiring violent action in other groups. The Brown Berets panicked police officials. The police and sheriff's department in Los Angeles abandoned reason in harassing, intimidating, and persecuting the Brown Berets. Police and sheriff's deputies raided the Berets, infiltrated them, libeled and slandered them, and even encouraged other counter groups to attack members. The objective was to destroy the Berets and invalidate the membership in the eyes of the Anglo and Chicano communities. At the Chicano Moratorium in 1971, Chicanos came together to protest the disproportionate number of colored recruits from the working class fighting in the Vietnam War. A commotion broke out at a store nearby, which led to an unnecessary visit from the police. This soon led to brutal violence and bloodshed, which affected the Brown Berets' stance on demonstrations. It was decided that public demonstrations were no longer efficient in transmitting the message of peace. Along with infiltration from the police, the Brown Berets soon dissipated into just individuals fighting for a common cause due to a split in ideologies among members. Some thought more radical forms of aggression should be put in play, others did not. Today, though there is still discrimination in certain parts of LA, the main goal of the Brown Berets and the youth from the Chicano movement was achieved. The quality of education has improved, and thanks to their efforts, we now have Chicano Latino Studies courses offered.
Aprendimos a luchar. Yo vengo del Imperial, de Coachella y San Joaquín, a pelear con los rancheros.